All right, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. Thank you so much for finding a time in your schedule to be with me at this time for about roughly an hour webinar on using Agentic AI to do story point and hours estimation. This feature is available in the iALM.ai, a complete AI-enabled platform from iALM software. My name is Magdi Hanna. I am the CEO of iALM Software, and I'm pleased to be with you this morning. I apologize that I am not using a full slide show in PowerPoint because the GoToWebinar platform we are using, they came up with an app recently, and the app does not do very well with the slide show mode. So unfortunately, I have to show you the whole screen as you can see. But that should not affect anything we do. Let's talk about story points. If you have been working on Agile projects before, you know about user stories. You know also that Agile teams typically use what's called the story points to estimate user stories. And some Agile teams I've known continue to use the number of hours as a way of estimating how much effort is needed to implement a user story. I come from traditional software development for the last 45 years or so. So I'm not very much convinced with story points as a way to estimate. Maybe I should ask how many of you actually use story points in their estimation in the Agile project. If you do, please go ahead and raise your hand. Does this mean that the rest of us are using number of hours as a way of estimating? If you're using number of hours, please go ahead and raise your hand. Anyone? If you're not using story points and you're not using number of hours, I wonder what you are using. If you're using something different that I'm not aware of, go ahead and share it with me on the chat. People who use user stories, they say that story points are good because it combines the effort, the complexity of the user story, and also it combines how much we don't know about the user story. And that makes sense because when we estimate based on what we know. You give me a task to estimate and to tell you how many hours it is going to take me to complete it. I will estimate based on what I know about the task. I will not think about what I don't know. And that's what people claim. And I'm saying claim because it is not clear to me yet how story points actually include the uncertainty, how much we don't know, into the estimate. And people make it very clear that story points are not number of hours. So if someone says this user story takes 5 story points or 10 story points, that does not mean 5 hours or 10 hours, okay? So we know that. Now, the question now that I've been investigating and looking into why people like to use story points and not number of hours. Because number of hours is the traditional way by which we estimate the effort of any task, whether it is user story or requirement or anything. So people claim that if we say number of hours, that gives or creates what we call a false perception. What that means is they say, if someone says this user story can take 7 hours, it sounds precise, but in fact it's not. Why? Because they say it might take 8 hours, it might take 9 hours, it might take 5 hours. Well, that's true, but estimation is estimation. When we estimate 5 hours or 7 hours, we know it could be plus or minus something. And I'm not sure exactly, and that's my own position. I'm not sure if story points have solved that problem, because when we say this user story is worth 8 story points or 5 story points, we don't know if that's true or not. In my opinion, again, and anyone else can have the right to object to that, story points did not solve that problem of false perception. Again, there are claims that says the number of hours ignores complexity and uncertainty. I must agree that when I say this user story is going to take 10 hours, I am estimating this based on what I know. I'm not including anything or thinking about how much I don't know. So the truth is, yes, I could be estimating the number of hours based on false understanding. But that's why in every Agile project, we suggested that the Agile team takes the estimate and talk about it and break down the user story into something and come up with, is it 5 hours? Is it 7 hours? Maybe no, maybe it's 8. And that's always true. The third claim, which I very much agree with, when we say this user story will need 7 hours or 10 hours, we don't take in our consideration who is going to write the code and who is going to test, because different people are different. So you may estimate a user story to be 10 hours, but that's assuming Joe is going to do it, because we know how Joe is fast in doing things, right? If someone else does it, we're not sure anymore that's going to be 10 hours. But again, that's a problem that's in the number of hours estimation. But again, I'm not sure that story points solve that problem either. Again, I've been reading a lot. I've been talking to Agile teams, and they tell me that it is easier to compare things, meaning that it is not that easy to say this user story requires 10 hours or this user story is 8 story points, but it is easier for people to say this user story is a little bit bigger than this user story. And since this other user story is 5 points, then maybe this one, which is slightly bigger, is going to be 8 points. That's a very much rough estimate. Okay. In order to understand how people estimate story points, you got to understand what's called the Fibonacci numbers or Fibonacci sequence. This is a very mathematical concept which people in Agile projects decided to adopt in order to decide or to determine or to estimate story points. Without getting into the details of Fibonacci sequence, these are the numbers. You look at this sequence carefully. Every number is the sum of the 2 numbers before that. So it starts with 1, then 2, then 3 is the sum of 1 plus 2. You can see that. 5 is the sum of 2 plus 3, and so on. 8 is the sum of 3 plus 5. 13 is 5 plus 8. 21 is 8 plus 13. Now, someone says, why is that? Why are we using Fibonacci numbers? Why can't we just numbers? Like the same way we use number of hours. When we estimate number of hours, we are free to say, this is 7 hours, this is 9 hours, this is 8 hours. And the numbers do not have to be on this Fibonacci sequence. Well, the claim is that as the number goes bigger, the gap between the numbers increase. So one thing important to know about estimating the story points in Fibonacci number is that a story point can be either 1 or 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, or 34. It cannot be 30. It cannot be 20. It cannot be 25. It has to be one of those numbers. So, and the claim that when the user story starts to get bigger, one person is going to say, this story point is, this user story is 21 points. And another person says, well, no, actually it's a 34. Well, there is a big gap between them. Is it 21 or 34? And no one can say, well, it might be 25. No, 25 is not there. There is no numbers in between, either 21 or 34. Now, that causes people to justify why they're choosing those numbers. So the person who said it's really 34 points, she or he have to explain why. What are they thinking? What kind of things they know about the user story that caused them to, or triggered them to say it's 34 points. And that by itself is useful because now the other person who said 21 points learned something that he or she did not know. So the team at the end will have to settle on, is it 34 or is it 21? Because the person who said 21 may say, no, what you're saying is not true. All these complexity you're referring to are not there. So I still insist on 21. So again, it becomes up to the team to decide. That's how story points work. Now, there are a number of methods that people have used in different agile projects to do story points estimates. I'm not going to waste your time with this. If you've used the story points for estimation, then you're probably using one of those. The most common one of them is called the planning poker. And that's simply every member of the team. So the agile team sits down and they look at the user stories, and they take one user story, and every person, I'm not going to say every developer, because QA teams are also part of this process. They privately select a number, which must be one of the numbers on the Fibonacci sequence, okay, whatever it is, secretly. And then suddenly everyone at the same time reveals the card. The reason for revealing the card simultaneously is because we don't want someone to say, well, I thought it's a 31. Someone says, oops, why did I estimate a lower number? Let me increase my number a little bit. No, everyone can reveal their number at the same time. And then the team starts talking about different numbers, okay? So someone talks to the person who gave a higher number, says, tell us why you have a higher number, because the rest of the people are in the low end and you're the kind of the outlier, or your number is the outlier, so tell us why, and so on, and discussion go on. That's how the planning poker works. Again, this is the most common one. Selecting numbers secretly, reveal all the number simultaneously, have a discussion, and then settle on a number. And you do this for every user story. Now, if you have a very large number of user stories, especially if the team is looking at the backlog, and the backlog, as we all know, is the list of all potential features we want to include in the application or in the release or in the sprint, okay? So if we're looking at the backlog, we might have 30, 40, maybe 100 user stories. So with that, people group user stories into groups depending on size. So people say, okay, this one and this one and this one seems to be the biggest of all the user stories. Put them here in this group. Okay, this one and this one and this one seems to be the smallest of all user stories. Put them in this group. And maybe this one and that one and that one is slightly bigger than the smallest, so let's put it in another group. So again, in my opinion, it's a very arbitrary, because the team can easily put a story point in the wrong group, thinking that it is simple enough, but it is not. Okay, so now we have groups of user stories. So if we have a total of, say, 20 user stories, just for a small number here. So we say, okay, this group has 3, this group has 2, and this group has 5, and this group has 10. Okay. And they say the group that has 10 is the smallest user stories, and this group has a little bit more, and so on. And then the team start working on the groups to say, okay, no, we're going to move this user story from this group to this group because it seems like it's not as small as we thought. It needs to move to the other group, and so on. Again, very arbitrary. This is very similar. Some people took this affinity estimation and kind of formalized it into what's called the bucket system. And this works, again, for very large groups of user stories. You can create buckets, simply groups, again. But again, this is typically physical buckets. And in the bucket, there are labels. And you say, okay, we're going to take those user stories, put them in this bucket, this user story, put them in this bucket. Again, in my opinion, it's very arbitrary. And the buckets are labeled with numbers that belong to the Fibonacci sequence, as you can see. So this is very much like the affinity estimation. Some people take the easy way and follow the t-shirt sizing. I've seen many projects like that. I myself have worked in projects while I was not in charge of doing the estimation, but when we received the user stories, someone else had done the estimation, and they had the user stories either small or or medium or large or X large or X small, and depending on what? Depending on what they believe how complex the user story is. And the last approach, which is in my opinion, is not much better than Fibonacci numbers. It takes numbers that are power of 2. So the numbers of the story pointer numbers would be either 1 or 2, 4, 8. You can see now it's a power of 2 because 2 to the power of 2 is 4. When I say power of 2, I'm assuming you know that it's meaning that the number is times itself. Okay. So power of 2 is like that. So again, it's just another numbering. Those are the methods out there for estimating user stories based on Fibonacci numbers and other approaches. Now, of course, I've been working on building systems for years, and I built very sophisticated systems for the Air Force, for the United States Air Force, for the Army, for large companies, large systems, aircraft control systems. And I have used my own methods to do the estimation. And the method I use is very much pragmatic, common sense. Let me just make a simple analogy for you to understand why do I claim that the method or the approach I'm using is very pragmatic, very practical, much common sense. When you bring some contractor to do some work in your home, okay, and let's assume that you're asking the contractor to do some work in your backyard. And the work is not minor. He's not doing a landscaping. Oh, he's doing sophisticated landscaping, but also he's creating a swimming pool and he's doing a fountain and things like that. Okay, not a very large project, but a reasonable size project. So you get the contractor, you give them your requirements, kind of. And you say, I want to do this and this and this and that. What do you think the contractor would do in order to give you an estimate? Because you're looking for an estimate, because supposedly you're looking for estimates from 2 or 3 contractors to help you determine which contractor you go with. I want you to think, what do you think the contractor would do? Do you think he's just going to sit down in his office or stand in your backyard and say, well, I think this is about $7,000. How does he know that he's right? Where does he get the precision? Of course, we all know that contractors will always overestimate. But again, he can overestimate and price himself out of the market. And we have seen this happening. I got contractors who give me $35,000 on one project, and another contractor give me $7,000 for the same project. So that contractor who said $35,000, he did not use a practical, pragmatic approach. So the pragmatic approach is to take the project and break it down into pieces. I mean, I'm sure you know that. Any one of you would have done that. You don't just shoot a number, but you rather break down the project into tasks and perhaps subtasks. So you take the big project, say, we're going to do the swimming pool, we're going to do the fountain, and we're going to do landscaping. Okay, three different big tasks. Now you take every task and break it down further to subtasks and so on. And only then the contractor will be able to say, okay, now I'm looking at those small subtasks and I can assign number of hours or number of dollars to each one of those. He actually goes and say, okay, how many days is going to take me to this task, to do this task, and how many people I am going to put into this. And based on the number of days or number of hours and the number of people, he can more accurately estimate the cost. Okay. So that's exactly what I've been doing. Now, the trouble with Agile, the trouble with the fact that you cannot use this method in Agile is because it requires you to do a lot of upfront work to break down the user story into tasks and subtasks. And people who are estimating user stories do not want to spend time breaking down the user stories into tasks and subtasks. But that's why, thanks to Agentic AI, in our platform that will do this for you easily. So because if I were to explain my approach to agile teams, certainly they're going to resist it. They're going to say, we don't have time to break a user story to tasks and subtasks because we have a backlog of 20 user stories, and we'll decide to select out of 20 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 user stories that we're going to include in this sprint. So we need a quick way by which to decide or estimate each user story so that we can see how many user stories can fit in one sprint. So the solution is this. I took my approach, which I've used in many projects before, and I built it into the iALM.ai Agentic AI system, which is complete platform. It's an ALM platform that has user stories, has requirements, it has scenarios, it has test cases, it has the code, everything. But the trick here, or the approach here, is to base your estimates on actual work required, not just guessing. By breaking it down in user stories to scenarios and or acceptance criteria, tasks and subtasks. If you can do this upfront, you would have a better basis for estimating a user story. And by the way, this approach works with user stories or requirements, which means whether your project is agile or non-agile, it works the same way. And now, since we have tasks and subtasks, we can allocate or assign story points or number of hours, if you want to go number of hours, to each task. If you estimate or you assign number of hours to each task, you're doing exactly like what the contractor we talked about does. Okay, this approach is not flawed at all. This approach considers everything. For people who claim that the number of hours ignores complexity and uncertainty, that's not true. Because as you are going to see in a little bit, the agentic AI, the model, will give you a number of story points or a number of hours for each subtask. And the team can still come back and say, why is this task only 3 hours? Or why is it only 2 story points? This task seems to be more complicated than it seems. And then we have the discussion, the same discussion we would have in the Agile project, okay? And we decide, is it 3 hours? Maybe it's 4 hours, maybe it's 5, and so on. So you have the ability, because that's the thing about agentic AI. Agentic AI gives you what it thinks is right, but it leaves the authority with you to override what it says. Okay, we'll see this in a little bit. And of course, once agentic AI assigns a number of story points or a number of hours to each task, it rolls them up, and now the team can continuously refine the numbers, going through the tasks and so on. Very quick here, I'm going to show you this slide. This is the iALM.ai platform. It's a complete agentic AI platform that does everything you can imagine systems or application lifecycle. It's an application lifecycle management, but it's totally AI. It allows you to specify user stories and or requirements. It works equally for agile and non-agile projects. And it allows you to do all the project management stuff, from estimation to timelines to workload assignment and everything, and timeline and so on. It does issue management. If you run tests and the test fails, you can create an issue or a bug, whatever you call it. It does everything yet you need to do with test management and test design. So it creates scenarios, create acceptance criteria. It takes those and creates test cases. And all this AI, all this is agentic AI. You don't spend a lot of time doing that. Maybe the document management is the only component that's not using agentic AI at this point, but certainly very soon we're going to find something to use there. Change management is very important because user stories and or requirements change over time. Users change their mind, right? And when a user story changes, then test cases have to change, scenarios have to change, code has to change, and the change management piece orchestrates all that. Use cases, if you're familiar with them, use cases are those more complex structures. They're more complex than user stories. They're more complex than requirements. They give you lots of details, but when your project needs them, you know about them. And the last component is collaboration. You can imagine with all that, there is a collaboration component that is very strong that allows the project team to collaborate about almost anything. So let me now to the platform so they can show you something. For now, I just started the platform, and on the left here you see all the systems that I could be working on. Different projects, they may not even be related. This is accounting system, this is airline system, this is diabetes management system, and so on. So I'm specifically looking at the airline system, and on the right here you see all the projects. So I'm going to open this project, which is ticket counter. That's all the user stories that have to do with the functionality at the ticket counter, right? So the dashboard, it gives you dashboard, but because I did not configure the dashboard yet, so you're not seeing anything. What I'm interested in is to show you the user stories. And if I expand functional user stories, I only have 6 user stories here. All right. It gives you some level of information for each user story here, number of scenarios, which sprint it is assigned to, which release it is assigned to, and the status where it is backlog or something. So let me open some user stories here. So let me open this. This is number 7. And number 7 has sub user stories. Okay, so you can imagine number 7 is like an epic. That's a large user story. Of course, it says as a ticket counter, I want to be able to make a reservation for a passenger. When a passenger walks into the ticket counter and says, I need to make a reservation, whatever. So ticket counter people can still make reservations. So because that user story is big, of course, in Agile, we break it down into a number of smaller user stories. Okay. So if I were to click on any one of them as a ticket counter agent, I want to be able to book a flight based on customer criteria. So let's open this one here. When you look at a user story like that, it has all the details. Right now, this user story has not been estimated, no story points, no number of hours. Okay, it has a description. It has some scenarios. It has 11 scenarios that have been created already. And if I click on those, I'll see the scenarios. But remember, scenarios are also created using AI. It has also 15 acceptance criteria. If I click on that, these are the acceptance criteria created by AI. Okay, and I'll show you in a little bit how this happens. Okay, of course, for each acceptance criteria, we indicate whether it has been tested or not, and if it has been tested, is it pass or fail, and so on. Okay, so I'm going to close that. Let me show you scenarios very quick, although this webinar is not about creating scenarios. As you can see, all scenarios here show that the creator is AI assistant. Okay, if I open one of the scenarios, it gives me all the details about scenarios, including the risk analysis, including the frequency, how often this scenario could possibly happen, the impact of failure. If that scenario were to fail in production, what can happen? It shows me the probability of failure, what is the likelihood for the scenario to fail, and that's all AI generated. Okay, I know it's hard for humans to estimate that stuff. And it gives you, and when we create test cases, the formal test cases are going to be down here, and the informal test cases or the ad hoc test cases are going to be down here, because the Agentic AI also creates the test cases for you. Let's go back to the user story. Now, The AI assistant is sitting down here. I can do any one of those things. Okay, so let's just go quick and say estimate story points. And because this user story already have a reasonable description, and it has a number of scenarios, and it has a number of acceptance criteria, Agentic AI will have an easy time give you more accurate estimates. If this user story did not have any one of those components, it will advise you to create scenarios and or acceptance criteria. If the Agentic AI finds that the description of the user story is not detailed enough, it'll tell you to add more description. Let me just click here to estimate user stories. Now, the agent will take the information it has in this user story, the description, the title, the scenarios, the acceptance criteria, and it comes back and says, okay, based on this, I broke down the user story into a number of tasks and subtasks. And I did this based on those assumptions, which of course the Agile team can look at those assumptions and say, okay, these assumptions make sense. Oh, this assumption does not make sense. Because whatever. So they have the opportunity to review assumptions made by the AI agent based on which it broke down the user story. And then the agent tells you also that I estimated this task, which is designing UI for the flight search input fields and results display. I estimated this to be 5 story points. Very simple. The Agile team says, I wonder why. Okay, here you go. You put the cursor here. This is from the Agentic AI. This is simply saying, I decided on 5 story points based on this. If you like it, fine. If you don't like it, you say, no, that is actually, in my opinion, 7 story points. Or maybe 5 story points, whatever, and save. Now, you can leave them as they are. You can edit them. That's where the team uses the assumptions and the information here to adjust, and they decide. A developer may say, oh, the database scheme is going to take much more than that. Let me see why AI said that. It says implementing database changes to support So I guess the AI is forgetting that we also need to do this. So I'm going to say this is not 5 points. This is perhaps what? 11 points. So now, remember, look at the story points estimate for this user story is still 0. Someone says, how come it is still 0 if I have numbers for the tasks here? Well, because you have not yet decided which of those tasks make sense to this user story, because again, the team has the freedom. Remember, this is a very critical component of Agentic AI. It gives you the full freedom to override what the agent is doing. So the team can come and say, well, this task does not make sense. I don't think we need this task because that has already been done, whatever, for whatever reason. So what the agent is expecting of you to do now is to go and select. It tells you here to calculate, you need to select the tasks. You can say all tasks make sense. Select all of them. All right. Or you can say, no, I'm going to only select those 2 tasks for the UI design. I'm going to select this task for the database schema. And I'm going to select this and whatever. Okay. And then what? The number is still 0. Then you say, now calculate the story points. It's just being careful. It says, if you already have calculated the story points before, this will override it. Say, yes, that's fine. Now, based on the tasks I selected, there are 19 points. Very simple. Now, look at this message here. It says tasks attached to the user story. Remember, the platform is also doing a project management. So as a result, we have all the tasks that need to be performed for that specific user story. So I'll show you the tasks now. So now we saw how the estimates work. We saw how we can go back and override some of the decisions made by the agent. Let's go back here. Let's close this. Okay. And now I am here in the user story. If I scroll down, here are the tasks I chose. So I'm going to click on those. Okay. And it tells you right here that those tasks were created by the AI assistant. And each one of them, if I can open each one of those tasks, that's the one I changed, remember? Because I think it was 3 and I changed it to 5. And it gives you a lot of other information, who's doing this task and so on. But that's the project management piece. It gives you, a lot of information about the task and the status and things like that. I'm not going to dive into this now, okay? Because I still have a lot of things to show you. And clearly tell you that this is a user story level task. Why? Because there are some other tasks that are more of project level, the kind of tasks like building the database for the testing environment or establishing the testing environment, like anything on the project level. Installing some software. It's not specific to a specific user story. Okay, so let me get out of that task screen. So look at the breadcrumbs here. I'm going to go back to user story, the user story I was looking at. And now let's assume that I'm working on a different project that does not care about story points, but rather cares about number of hours. So now this user story, that's a good choice. Why? Because that user story does not have scenarios, does not have acceptance criteria. So in a way, if I go to the AI assistant and say, estimate number of hours or story points, it does not have enough information to do that. And that is the way agentic AI works. It cannot give you data unless it has enough information. So let me just go here and say, I'm going to use this user story now to estimate number of hours, not user stories. And guess what? It happens the same way. The same method I explained to you, breaking down the user story to scenarios, acceptance criteria, tasks, subtasks. It happens whether you want to get estimates for story points or hours estimate. So let me click on that. Now, the agent comes back and says, it would not make sense. You can get estimates, but it's not going to be accurate. Okay. So, and you could say, I don't care. I don't want you to take the time to break it down into scenarios or acceptance criteria. Just generate number of hours estimate. You could do this on your own risk. You'll get an estimate that's not accurate. But you can also decide, especially you are not doing the work. The agent is doing the work for you. You can generate your scenarios here. You can generate your acceptance criteria here. And by the way, there are 2 other webinars that I've done over the last couple of months. And they are on the website for iALM-ai that shows you exactly how we create the scenarios. And I'm not sure I'm going to go through the whole thing, because if I click on this now, for example, generate acceptance criteria here, it comes back and says, okay, do you want acceptance criteria? Based on this tiny description that you give me, I can do that. But they're not going to be accurate either. So what do I need to do? It tells you, I can generate some clarifying questions for you. The purpose of clarifying questions are the same kind of questions that someone needs to ask while we are looking at user story. It's just the AI agent helps you come up with those questions. Guess what? For so many years, I've been trying to teach software engineers, developers, QA, everyone. I've been trying to teach them how to ask the right questions. And it didn't work, because people are different. Someone can ask good questions, some other people cannot ask good questions. So that's why I am using agentic AI to do that for me. So I can say, okay, fine. What questions do you have? And again, this is done in details in the 2 webinars I talked about. Okay, for that user story, it gives me total of 15 questions. Again, one more time, those are the kind of questions that the product owner needs to take and find out which of those make sense to him or to her and answer them. And if he or she provide answers to the AI agent, then it will create acceptance criteria. Now, with those questions, If you answer them, you still have the option. You still have the authority to override. Okay, if you answer some questions, you can ask for follow-up questions, because as you know, if someone asks you a question and you give an answer, that someone could possibly have a follow-up question based on the answer you have given. Or you can go ahead and generate scenarios or generate acceptance criteria. Of course, in all cases, you can export this whole thing to PDF and send it to your product owner to answer. Well, guess what? I'm going to be lazy here, or stubborn kind of, saying I am not answering any of your questions. And I am going just to ask you to estimate number of hours. Okay, number of hours based on what? Based on that one line description. Okay, so you could do that. Is it good to do? No, because the AI agent tells you, no, it's not good. At least create acceptance criteria. At least create scenarios. Okay, you know what? I did not answer any of the questions. Let me help the agent a little bit and say, okay, let's generate acceptance criteria anyway. Oh, it says you need to answer clarifying questions. You already generated, asked me to generate questions, but you didn't answer any. I'll say, no, I don't answer. So it doesn't really let me generate. If you generated questions, if the AI agent gave you questions, then you need to answer them. So let me try to create scenarios, because if I create scenarios, it will give more information to the agent to give me the estimate. Same thing. It says you asked me to generate questions. You need to answer some of those. Okay. Well, let me say, okay, what type of reservations we are processing payment for? Okay, either one way or round the trip. I'm just answering one question, and I'm going to save the answer here. Now I made the agent happy. Now say generate acceptance criteria. Now it gave me some acceptance criteria, just based on the one-line description and the one question I answered. I said I'm giving you 9 acceptance criteria. Something no agile team can do in a couple seconds like that. So you can view the acceptance criteria. Okay, and you can look at them. The team can look at them, see if they make sense or not. Any acceptance criteria that does not make sense, they can delete it. Okay, if I wanted to give the agent more help, I say, now, since I answered the one question, generate some scenarios for me. And it goes and generates scenarios, again, based on the minimal data I gave it. But always presenting you with the risk that says, these are not complete scenarios, but if that's what you want, here they are. Okay, so scenarios are taking a little bit more time because scenarios are more involving it. So it creates 6 scenarios, and I can look here at the generate scenario. By the way, this part that I'm doing really belongs to the 2 other webinars that are done in details. Here are the 6 scenarios, and it shows that created by the AI assistant. Okay, and you can click on any scenarios to see. Well, now, since now this user story has some scenarios, some acceptance criteria, I'm going to go back here to the user story on the breadcrumbs here. Go back to my AI assistant and say, based on those scenarios and the acceptance criteria, why don't you give you an estimate number of hours? It's going to do the same thing. It's going to take the scenarios, the acceptance criteria, the description, and it's going to break down the whole thing into tasks. The same thing exactly it did for the story points. Okay. Now the only difference here is that this is estimated number of hours. That's if your project, agile or none, prefers to use number of hours as opposed to story points. The platform is very flexible. The Agentic AI agent that's built into the platform is very flexible. Okay, because if we built this only for agile projects, you're going to get a project here and then someone says we don't use story points, we use number of hours. Here you go. And you can do the same thing. You can say, this task is not that big. I think our developers can finish this in much less hours. Sure, 5. It's okay. Now, you can select tasks, and you can, I'm going to just select all here. Now calculate number of hours. Look at the numbers. The top here is going to change. Yes, it's going to override what I have. 52 hours. Now, no one said you have to accept that, right? Because you can always go back and says 15 hours, for God's sake. No. That's probably only 10 hours. Fine. And if you do that and you save it and you go back, so how many, so I reduced 15. So here you go. I reduced 5. All right. So this is how it calculates number of hours. Thank you so much for joining me in this webinar, and I hope it was worth your time to be with me. Thank you.